Welcome in to the Late Night Gamecock Show. I am your host, as always, Matt Anderson. And joining me, as always, is Alex Jones of theBigSpur.com. Alex, what's going on, man?
Not much, just watching a whole bunch of basketball today. We're going to dive into all that, but getting ready for some spring football. We got it all going down right now, but it seems like it's starting to gear up right now.
Yeah, as you can see, my background will be the last time I use this background until, October, November of next year. The men's basketball team obviously had a tough game today, a game they battled back in, and Alex and I are going to talk about it soon. On the show tonight, we're going to talk basketball, men's and women's. We're going to talk softball. We're going to talk baseball. We're going to talk football. It's that kind of like glorious time of year where everything kind of marries together. And we have so many sports that, some have concluded, some are going to continue going. And hopefully the women's team can find a way to get back to the Final Four, win another national championship, make Dawn Staley a 4-time national champion. And baseball team is playing right now. Alex is going to give periodic updates throughout the show tonight so we can see where we are. And I think last time I looked, Gamecocks were up 5 or 6-1. So they were down 1-0 early. But Alex, I know that before we started the show tonight, you were filing an article in the Big Spur. Where is Rico Dowdle, former Gamecock, going to play next year?
Yeah, he's coming back to the Carolinas. He signed he's agreed to terms on a 1-year deal that Ian Rappaport from NFL.com has. That's worth up to $6.25 million. So it's also from him for one to come back to the Carolinas, but he's from Asheville, North Carolina. So that's great for him. He's been with the Cowboys for, I think, 4 or 5 years now. And this past season, he was number 1 running back for the Cowboys and had a pretty good year. He had a little over 1,000 yards. And I think it was just another solid season for him. But that makes it to where, obviously J.C. Horn just signed that historic deal with the Panthers a few days ago. And it's a bunch of Carolina Gamecocks on this: Jadeveon Clowney, DJ Wanham, Xavier Legette. It's a lot of Panthers on there. A lot of Gamecocks on the Panthers already, and now he's just another one.
Yeah, it's fun. I love fantasy football, and I'm hoping that I can talk Mike Morgan into doing a fantasy football show with me. We've talked about it over the years, but his schedule is super jam-packed. But I was listening to a podcast the other day and said, of all the free agent running backs, who do you think would have the biggest impact in fantasy next year? And it was unanimous from the 2 guys that I was listening to, and they both said Rico. So happy for Rico. Obviously, Carolina is, a team that's maybe on the rise, that they play tough this year, but we'll see what happens. But Alex, what else have you been working on theBigSpur.com? It seems like every time I log in, there's another Alex Jones article.
Yeah, just kind of keeping up to see what's been said about South Carolina here before getting into preseason or spring practice. Hale McGranahan and I are kind of doing a position by position preview right now of going into spring practice. Let's see, I've done quarterbacks and running backs. Now I'll have offensive line up tomorrow morning, and we're kind of dividing it up and getting ready for spring practice, which it's going to be a fun spring practice. I know we're going to dive into it later tonight, but a lot of different position battles, a lot of different, just interesting storylines that are going on in spring practice. So we're getting ready to get all into that, and it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's crazy. We're like a week away from spring practice starting, and before you know it, it's going to be the spring game. Before you know it, the women's basketball team's going to be in the Final Four. Before you know it, the baseball team's going to scratch and claw their way to Omaha. Softball is going to be in the College World Series. We got a lot of good things happening at South Carolina right now. But with that being said, Alex, let's go ahead and hit the intro, and we'll get into the show.
Welcome to the Late Night Gamecock Show from Chief Sports, South Carolina. Here are your hosts, Matt Anderson and Alex Jones of theBigSpur.com.
Well, welcome back into the show. We're very excited for this show. We're also excited for next week's show. I'll go ahead and tease it. Alex knows this, but one of my good buddies that played college basketball, he was on the show last year. He probably watches more national college basketball than anybody on the planet. And I'm literally including any analyst you see on ESPN, on CBS. Like, this guy has a regular 9 to 5, just loves college basketball. So, and like I said, he played college basketball. So we're going to have him on the show Wednesday night at 8:00. So it's going to be the perfect time for you to figure out your last minute, bracket picks, all of that. So we'll have fun. We'll have fun with Mitchell Dieter next week. But Alex, basketball season has come to a conclusion. Watching the game today, I feel like the Gamecocks played. They did what they've done all season. They had a 10-minute stretch where it just got out of hand.
Yeah, I mean, really kind of didn't start off all that well. It was okay as a start, but then Arkansas really had that stretch, like you mentioned, or South kind of just went through one of the scoring jobs they've had throughout the year, and then Arkansas kind of got enough to where it got to a 20-point game, I think, around there at halftime, and you kind of wondered, like, all right, what's going to be South Carolina's mentality coming out? Because they could have coming in the second half, because they could have easily just gone ahead and said, all right, well, it's probably going to be the last game of the season. Let's just go ahead and call it. But they didn't. I mean, they battled back, and Colin Murray-Bullis just kind of willed that team really into that stretch where they got it down to, I think almost tied pretty much in that game. But
they were down by one at like in the last 5 minutes of the game.
Yeah, and had a couple plays or two. I mean, that's just kind of the story of the season. There were a couple plays or two in that stretch where South Carolina could have gotten a rebound, taken it the other way, or a couple baskets would have gone in. Maybe it's a different story, and we're having a different conversation here. But I think that game was just kind of the story of the season so far, with how so many different things ended up leading to a close loss.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because the men's team ended up playing 32 games this season. They're 12-20. They're not over 500. They don't have an opportunity to go to the NIT, the NCAA tournament, or the CBI, if that's even still a thing. I can't remember if it is. But 12-20 on the season, 2-16 in the SEC. But what I go back to for this season, Alex, and I want to get your take on this, it's just the close losses. South Carolina had 10 losses by less than 10 points on the season, and 8 of those 10 losses were less than 6 points. So you're really talking about potentially 2, maybe 3 possessions changing 8 of those games.
Yeah, and you think about it, South Carolina finds a way to win, half of those, or maybe not even, or maybe just a little under half. They're probably entering the NCAA or the SEC tournament on the bubble. I mean, with some of the losses those came against with Florida, I mean, they led for all but 5 seconds of that game, and Florida had the buzzer beater. You had the Auburn game where you had free throws there to win it. I mean, Auburn was pretty much unbeatable for the most part of the season. South Carolina had them right there. Mississippi State, you had them down in overtime. It's just, like you mentioned, 2 or 3 possessions and just maybe 2 or 3 plays away in a bunch of games this season, and that's something that's obviously. Now that the season's over, we can all look back on and see what went wrong. But I think Lamont Paris and his staff know what they got to go out there and do. In the transfer portal in the offseason to kind of fix some of that to get back to where, because last season South Carolina was so good in those games. That came down to 1 or 2 possessions. I mean, that was kind of the story of their season, was how well they did in crunch moments. But this year it just was really kind of the complete opposite for that team. They couldn't get it done in some of those games. So I think now they know what they got to go out there and see what they need to do in the offseason.
Yeah, we'll talk about the transfer portal and NIL situation a little bit later on. But, I always, when I hear college basketball analysts, and look, I don't think I'm a college basketball analyst. I think I just talk about college basketball. But, when I throw out a stat like that, Alex, that 8 of the 10 losses or 8 of the 12 losses, whatever, were by 6 points or less, immediately my cynical mind goes to say, oh, well, what about the wins? Were you barely winning? And that's not the case. South Carolina only had, 12 wins this season, but 11 of those wins were by double digits. So it's not like it was a 2 or 3 possession game for them to win those games. Now, 2-16 in the SEC, but those 8 losses by less than 6 points, I feel like I can legitimately make a claim that, maybe Miles Studi being out impacted this team. Maybe Jamari Thomas being out for a couple games impacted this team. Maybe Cam Scott not being the Cam Scott that everyone thought they were getting. And look, I've said this on the Big Spur. With Cam Scott, I do think that he's going to be better as a sophomore. 100% going to be better as a sophomore. But, is he going to stay?
Yeah, I mean that's gonna be is the roster. I mean, we could have a whole episode on what the roster may look like coming up. But to go back to your point about Miles Studi and Jamari Thomas, the thing with Miles Studi would have given them, especially in SEC play, was teams would have had to respect him from the 3-point line because I mean you saw what he could do against Clemson. Almost single-handedly beat Clemson with what he did in that game, and so I think that would have helped open up the paint a little bit more. And then with Jamari Thomas missing some of those games. You think back, the one of the games he missed was that Florida game, and that was the game where South Carolina really struggled to handle the press, and he probably could have helped that a little bit. And I think it's just one of those where we can look back and say all the ifs and all that, but I mean, we can keep going back to they're just a few possessions away in a lot of games, and then it kind of leads into on the road. South Carolina didn't play all that well this year either. I mean, that Tennessee game, that last game of the season, was one of their better ones on the road.
Yeah,
in SEC play, they weren't. A lot of times it seemed like they weren't even competitive in the second half. I think they let teams get away from it. And I think that was another thing that kind of led to some of the issues here down the stretch.
Yeah, and look, it's the polar opposite of last year. Like last year when we were talking about the NCAA tournament, I was just touting South Carolina as a team that has fared so well in neutral and road environments, and I think they were like 11-6 on the season, something like that, in road and neutral games. But one of the things that I remember from today's broadcast is Jay Billis, and love him, hate him, Duke guy, not Duke guy, whatever. He did say that this South Carolina team to finish last in the SEC is probably the best, or I think he said they are the best last place SEC team that he has ever seen. And I wanted to look at it, and the season's not over yet. There's still going to be the NIT conference tournaments, NCAA tournament, all of that. But South Carolina was originally projected by the computers, and then mostly KenPom, who I look at the most, as the 69th best team in the country, or 67th. And right now, they're the 69th best team in the country. Sometimes you just run into a buzzsaw. But, Alex, moving on to next season, next season is going to be interesting because you have 15 scholarships that you can award. I know that, Lamont Paris caught some flack from people on social media for, awarding Austin Hero a scholarship and, not trying to find somebody else in the summer as a transfer guy or in the spring. But looking at it right now, I'm just going to go through it. Seniors that can return, it looks like, seniors next year, I should say. Zach Davis will be a senior next year. Nick Pringle, because of the JUCO stuff, can evidently maybe come back. Miles Studi, it's a wait and see type deal. And then, rising juniors, you have Colin Murray Boyles. Don't know what Colin's going to do. Obviously has the opportunity to go to the NBA. You have Morris Ugasuk, Jordan Butler. Rising sophomores, Austin Hero, Arden Conyers, Cam Scott. And I guess Oku Federico would be a redshirt freshman next year. I think he's redshirting this year. So that's a lot of names that I just riled off. I mean, obviously not all of them are going to come back, but South Carolina has got to find, just looking at these questions, like, is Colin Murray Boyles going to stay or is he going to go pro? I've said on the Big Spur, if he gets a top 20 draft grade, he needs to go. If he gets a 20 to 40, it becomes a question. I think that he has things he has to work on, and it's been talked about a lot. The outside shooting, he drained a 3 today against Arkansas, but those are the things that NBA teams don't really care about. They think they can fix that, and they'd rather you do it in their organization where they have control other than, your college basketball coach. But Lamont Paris has a lot of respect in the NBA. The Studi and Pringle stuff, Alex, are they going to come back? Can they come back? And then, Cam Scott and Arden Conyers. Arden Conyers is a redshirt freshman who'll be a sophomore next year. Cam Scott will be a rising sophomore next year. Your thoughts on all of that, Alex, and basically the question marks.
Yeah, it's a lot of questions on the roster. It's going to be an interesting offseason just from a perspective of not only what South Carolina can add through the transfer portal, but, what kind of numbers maybe do they have to work with from, maybe do they have any roster attrition? I think you always expect a little bit, just any team would. Any season, just because it's kind of the nature of college sports these days. But, you mentioned Nick Pringle having the extra year, and then you see, Miles Studi maybe applying for or working to apply for next year. Like, do they come back? It's just there's a lot of different people, and then you got the Colin Murray Bulls part of it. Like, when you looked at it in the middle of the conference slate, he was still kind of towards the lottery draft projections, somewhere in that range.
Mm-hmm.
And he really had a great end of the season. I mean, that Tennessee game was maybe, if you want to say, his worst game towards the end of the season. He still found a way to kind of battle on that game. But I had to wonder what NBA executives and front offices think about him right now, because the way he battled in those games, and he showed a little bit of a shot today. Obviously, he made the 3-pointer, then had the mid-range jumper as well. So, we'll see. I think that's, the next few weeks, especially when the portal opens, is going to be really interesting to watch South Carolina, because the roster could look, maybe completely different next year, and we'll see just with all the movement that could happen.
Yeah, I think Colin has a decision in this type of environment. I mean, who knows? Like, JP Pegues went from Furman to Auburn, and it was between Auburn, South Carolina, and Florida. And, you look at those two teams that he was considering outside of South Carolina, and they're top 5 teams in the country, according to, pretty much every poll, every metric. And he's averaging like 2.8 points per game at Auburn. Now, is that he's not really that good? He scored a crap ton of points at Furman. I don't know. But, looking at that portal, I think that, and before we get to the portal, Alex, I do want to talk about this. The Gamecocks do have 4 incoming freshmen next year. The class is ranked 26th in the country. Everybody that's watching this show, everybody that's on the Big Spur, social media, whatever, they know about Eli Ellis. So Eli Ellis is a top 70 player in the country, back-to-back MVP of the OTE, which is like Overtime Elite. It's a kind of grassroots program that's coming up in high school basketball. Can obviously put a lot of points up, can facilitate, gets a lot of assists, but he's 6 foot, 185 pounds. He's got that dog in him. So, hopefully he'll be able to contribute next year. I think that, he's going to be a 4-year college player for sure. Mm-hmm. Like he's not going pro in the NBA early. But then you have 3-star forward EJ Walker, 6'8", 230 pounds, out of Kentucky. He's a guy that I kind of think looks a little bit like Colin Murray Boyles, just kind of. But then you have 3-star. He's kind of a wing. He can play shooting guard. He can play small forward. But Grant Polk, he's up at 6 foot 795 pounds, probably one of the best shooters in the country. And then you have 3-star forward Hayden Alsamian, 6'8", 220 pounds. Probably butchered his name. But he plays with Eli Ellis on OTE and has had a pretty good year. So, Alex, when you look at that, I mean, I think they only have 1 scholarship open if everybody stays, like including Colin Murray Boyles, including Nick Pringle, including Miles Studi, including all the underclassmen. That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I think in college basketball right now, most teams are losing between 4 and 6 players off their roster to the transfer portal. And oftentimes these players have nowhere to go, but they go anyway. So looking at that, they can take 1, maybe Austin Hero, moves down a level and doesn't take up a scholarship. Maybe that's 2. But I like Austin Hero. I think he has a pretty good chance, and he obviously has that pedigree. Maybe Colin Murray Boyles goes, so that's 3. And then you're looking at how many people leave. So, for me, Alex, and I'm gonna ask you a question in a second. I really think that, it would be great to get Pringle, Colin Murray Boyles, Arden Conyers, and Cam Scott back. I think you need at least 4 players to stay on the roster. It's roughly 25% of the roster, 30%. And that amount of players can, I'll throw Morris in there too, and Oku. So you're talking about 30% of those guys. Like, someone has to say, like, this is how we do stuff here.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
We were texting about that earlier, and I think that is kind of the way to look at it, because, I mean, you do need, because especially, Lamont Paris's kind of defensive system and all that. Like guys like Miles Studi, who's been in the program a few years now, he knows all that. He knows what's expected of you. So I think that will be key for whoever the stays, but then for the guys that are coming in, those returner guys can kind of help, bridge the gap a little bit to help them learn the system much or quicker. But, back to the freshman, like Eli Ellis, like that guy looks like he can come in and help you right away. And obviously we'll get into, I think here in a little bit, just about what South Carolina needs to look for in the off season. But, from that point guard perspective and all that, like, I think he can help you. He brings, that I'm interested to see kind of his mentality because you see it, online and all that kind of that mentality he can bring to South Carolina. And then, Hayden Simeon, I think is really interesting as well. You mentioned DJ Walker, like, I'm interested to see with Hayden, like if he can come in and play right away because he and Eli are going to already have that chemistry playing at OTE. But he and EJ Walker are really going to be interesting to see kind of as freshmen how much they can contribute. And then Polk, like we talk about this year, like South Carolina just needs more shooting, and he's going to bring that. It's just what the question will be with him is like, is he ready to go right away to give them anything?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like Trent Noah, who was in the class last year, went to Kentucky. I'm hoping that Grant Polk can be similar to that. But, yeah, so, I mean, that's men's basketball. We're going to talk about it a lot going forward. There's going to be so much transfer portal news. There's going to be, nuggets and tidbits that we pick up. And, when the player commits, we're going to talk about it. If you have a KenPom subscription, go there. It's like $20 for the year. It's the best value you can find on any kind of subscription outside of thebigspur.com. But go look at players that have a really good true shooting percentage. Go look at people that have a high assist rate and look for players that are playing at a lower level or mid-major level. And just, South Carolina should have some money to spend this year, at least more money than they had last year. We're going to move on to women's basketball. But first, I have to give a shout out to Trent Dowd. Trent Dowd is in the comments, and he was actually a groomsman in my wedding. I think it's only like the first time he's ever watched the show, but appreciate Trent being here. Obviously, appreciate Craig and Exo and Steven and Billy, folks that have been with us since the beginning of it. We thank you all so much for being here. And, we love spending this time with you. But, talking about women's basketball, I think that the women's team is, probably going to be the number one overall seed. If not number one overall, number two overall, they're going to be a 1 seed. And now, they went through, sorry, I'm laughing at Trent. Trent is like essentially, I'll just give you guys some background. He's essentially Vince Vaughn from Wedding Crashers. Like that's his personality. So when he said, whoa, not the first time, it cracked me up. No, but the women's team is going to be a number 1 seed. They're going to be favorites to make the Final Four, favorites to get out of their side of the bracket for sure. I think that they're hitting on all cylinders right now, especially, on that neutral court when they played Texas. And we all know what happened, in Colonial Life Arena. And then they went on the road, lost to Texas by a couple points. And then I feel like they erased all doubt.
Yeah, you mentioned it. I think they're playing their best basketball right now and obviously playing at the right time. I mean, they kind of just ran through the SEC tournament. And then since that UConn game, it seems like they really kind of just locked in and are playing at their best. And, that Texas game really was kind of the stamp on really the regular season. Obviously, it was pro season play, but really now they enter the stretch or the tournament that's, the big dance. And, obviously you mentioned they're going to be number 1 overall seed. I think it should be locked up, based on their, entire body of work for all the wins they had. They just had the one Connecticut loss, and that, I mean, it was just a bad game overall for South Carolina, but overall, the whole body of work leads to, I think, South Carolina being a number 1 overall seed and, should have a stretch to, find a way to make it to the Final Four and hopefully for South Carolina to make it to the national championship.
Yeah, and I think that the Connecticut was just like the perfect storm. You had the winning streak at home. You had everything going that way. Gino is probably not going to coach much longer. You have, Connecticut, like, don't get it twisted. They're a really, really good team. But this South Carolina women's team, I think they have the most quad 1 wins in the country, maybe the most quad 1 and quad 2 wins in the country. And look, we hate it in football when it means you have a tough schedule. We hate it in men's basketball when it means you have a tough schedule. We hate it in baseball. We hate it in softball. But the women's basketball team has definitely answered the call. So I mean, I will probably lay some bucks down on them winning the national championship, especially if they're plus money. Baseball from the weekend, Alex, really quick, can we get a baseball score update? I think it was
Yeah, they're
6-1
up
last I saw.
7-1, bottom of the fifth.
Okay. So 7-1. Last weekend, they swept Morehead State. Gamecocks are 14-3. It looks like they're on their way to 15-3 to complete their non-conference before SEC play. I mean, you're still going to have like midweek games, but 15-3 going into the SEC. This past weekend, they scored 28 runs. They gave up 18 runs, 30 hits. The pitching staff, again, struck out 34 batters. The pitching staff has been really great at getting swings and misses. Friday was a bit of a nail biter. Alex, I know you were covering this and watching it, but down 5-2 after 4 innings, come back, win the game. Saturday they were up 14-5. I was actually at this game. It was a lot of fun for the first 4 innings, but in the 4th inning, it seemed like Coach Maneri made a lot of substitutions and got guys in the game. I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't know if this is over. Like, I'm just not sure. But, there was a long inning there when the starting pitcher had to come back after like 30, 35 minutes in the dugout. And it got close. It got within 3 runs. But the Gamecock pitching staff and the relievers and the closers closed that game out without giving up a run the last 3 innings. And then Sunday, oh, my God, what a nail biter. 1-0. Gamecocks scored 1, and that was enough, Alex. So your overall thoughts on the weekend?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy looking at, those first 2 games being 16-11, or excuse me, 11-7 and 16-11, and then all of a sudden it's 1-0 on Sunday. I think you probably go into that Sunday game thinking there are going to be a lot of runs scored, but credit to one. I mean, Morehead State's pitcher, I think, went 7 innings on Sunday, and credit to him. But I think South Carolina did what it had to do this weekend. Going into it, I think you wanted to see some offensive improvement just coming off that Clemson weekend. You want to see the bats start to get going. I think you saw some good signs of that. Obviously, Sunday it was a slow day offensively, but you did what you had to do. Now I think going into Georgia State game, you're up 7-1 right now. You got to find a way to take some momentum into this weekend against Oklahoma, who's a top 15 team. I think they're number 12 in the country right now. And so, I mean, every series in the SEC is not going to be easy, but, it's obviously a difficult one to start before you enter a stretch of really hard SEC schedule.
Yeah, I think it's really nice that you have Oklahoma coming to Founders Park. This is their first SEC series. And before we talk about that, I want to give a couple more shout outs to folks on Chat Row. Brian, we love seeing you and your mom in the chat every single week. We appreciate you watching. And then Big Red, a really, really good friend of mine as well. Have some crazy stories about me and him in college, but thank you guys for checking us out. We really do appreciate it. Oklahoma, according to Perfect Game, is the number 8 team in the country. So a really good team. They're 14-1 on the season. They lost to Dallas Baptist 11-1 last week. Dallas Baptist is ranked 21st in the country. At the time of that game, they lost to number 2 Virginia 5-4 in 12 innings, and then number 7 Oregon State. They beat them 8-4. Sorry, they beat Virginia. All 3 of those teams are currently ranked in the top 20. They've definitely played a tougher schedule than South Carolina to this point. I mean, you look at those 3 games, and look, all those games I believe are one-offs. But South Carolina's played Clemson in, home, neutral, and away game. So South Carolina's played played a tough opponent. I'll put it that way. Looking at this weekend, Friday, 7 p.m. first pitch. Like I said, it's at Founders Park. Saturday, 4 p.m. and then Sunday, 1:30. And like you said, Alex, it's just another test for the Gamecocks. Oklahoma is hitting .318 as a team. So far, they have 15 homers. But one of the big things for them is they've stolen 41 of 48 bases.
Wow. I mean, yeah, so that it's obviously they're going to test, the catchers. I mean, they obviously have had a lot of success with that. But I think the key with that is you're going to have to do your best to keep them off the bases, which means the pitching staff is going to have to kind of continue what they've been doing for the most part of the season. But also you got to be solid defensively, which, for the most part, South Carolina's been that as well. But, I think, again, not the key again this weekend is just going to be the bats. Like I think they got to be able to support the pitchers like they have been, really for the most of that Morehead State series, and then tonight they've got to continue that to find a way to not only build off of that but build for a tough SEC stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at Oklahoma, they have 6 guys that are everyday players batting over 300. Pitching staff has a 3.59 ERA. They've given up 104 hits and 7 home runs. Gamecocks, I believe, have let me see if I can find my notes here. Gamecocks have hit like 15 or 16 home runs, so maybe we'll see if the ball gets out of the yard. But pitching staff for the Gamecocks have struck out 197 batters. That's kind of been the mantra so far for this team. And look, they're probably playing some teams that are overmatched. And we always say like Clemson's the first big test of the year, but this one's going to be a big one. And, Alex, I don't know if you have any predictions. I do think the Gamecocks will find a way to win 2 out of 3, but I think it's going to be a very, very tough series. And if they get swept, I'm not surprised. If it's, they win 1 and lose 2, I'm not surprised, but I do think that Founders Park will get them to a 2-1 weekend record.
Yeah, I think it's another series where we're learning a lot about South Carolina. I think we said that about Clemson and things didn't go their way, but I can see them getting 2 out of 3. But it's almost like I wouldn't be too surprised by any outcome in this one. But I think South Carolina can find a way to get 2 out of 3. But it's just got to be got to have those complete performances because I think each game is going to be maybe a 1-run, 2-run types of games.
And I think that's going to be what's going to happen for South Carolina more often than not. South Carolina's hitting like 280 on the year, maybe 270. They have guys that can step up in big moments, Nathan Hall and Ethan Petrie for sure. But, they got to get Talmadge LaCroix healthy. They got the catcher is worrisome for me because I think the second string catcher is also hurt. And forgive me for forgetting his name right now. But Bo Hollins is a freshman that's coming on. Like, I think this is a year that, South Carolina needs to make a regional. It'd be great if they hosted a regional, but I think Paul Maneri is building for the future. But look, I'm never gonna count the Gamecocks out. We're gonna move on to softball really quick, and then we're gonna hit a sponsor break. Softball is gonna be quick. Look, softball is ranked in the top 10 in the country. They only have 3 losses on the season. They traveled to Oklahoma, and like I said on last week's show, Oklahoma is essentially the South Carolina women's basketball program of softball. I think they've won the last 4 national championships. And the softball team went to Oklahoma, went to Norman, and they lost all 3 games, but the differential was only 1 run in each of those games. And Alex, I know that you were pretty locked into the softball this weekend, so was I. Any thoughts that you want to give before we hit a sponsor break?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, for obviously getting swept, but I thought they were pretty impressive. I mean, going to Oklahoma, going to, number 1 Oklahoma, and they played like pretty much every game. Those first 2 games, really, they had chances to win. But Oklahoma's offense, I mean, I think we saw just how good and why they're a 4-time defending national champion. I mean, that team was awesome. But South Carolina showed why they're a top 10 team. And you can see, like, really, they didn't move in the rankings at all. South Carolina didn't move in the rankings at all. And I think, I think that they made a statement in that way coming off of the sweep of Duke. And obviously, I think tonight they lost to Coastal Carolina, but they did. But I think it's one of those where those midweek losses happen all the time. But now you got to find a way. I think Georgia's coming in this weekend, who's a top maybe 15 team in the country too. They're number 13 in the country. So SEC softball is just like pretty much every other sport in SEC. It's loaded, and South Carolina's kind of rose up here, and now it's going to be start off this weekend.
Yeah, and look, we always talk about how much Shane Beamer loves the South Carolina football program. Ashley Chastain Woodard loves the softball program. Like, she played here. She loves the University of South Carolina. She's going to give it her all. And I could not have been more impressed. I was hoping they would take 1 or 2 of them, and they had their chances. But, it wasn't in the cards, just how it worked. But I'm cracking up at Trent and Big Red here in the comments there. They're going back and forth. I'll give you a teaser for a story, and one day we'll actually give the story. So Big Red was actually at my 21st birthday party, where we had to call Eric Norwood to help us out. So funny story. You can take what you want from that, But Alex, let's go ahead and hit a sponsor break. And we come back, we're going to talk about spring football. We're less than a week away, so very excited.
Mike here for one of the better dining options in the capital city. You know, when I first moved there, I asked people around the radio station, where are the best wings? Well, the consensus was D's Wings. That was then. Today, they still have the best wings, but it's so much more. Now in their new location at 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia. Yeah, they get voted the best wings on a routine basis. Yes, they get voted the best sports bar on a routine basis, but they're not just about wings, and really, they're not just a sports bar. It is a family-run local restaurant and bar with 20 TVs and 25 beers on tap. And how about these daily specials? Every Monday night at D's, you've got 75-cent wings from 4 until closing. Tacos on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, 18 wings and a pitcher of beer for $29. You've also got ribs and oyster bucket specials on Thursday. And no matter how big the party is, 20 or more, no problem. Just call ahead of time and they'll take terrific care of you. They'll do takeout as well. And guess what? A human will answer the phone and take the order. Billy and his staff do an outstanding job. Check out D's 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia.
Yeah, and we always talk about Alex and I both love D's. I was in Columbia Saturday night, and I tried so hard to get my wife to go to D's Wings, but she wasn't feeling wings. So I'll have to find a way to get up with Alex. Maybe next weekend. Maybe I might try and sneak over to Columbia next weekend and see if we can get together. But this is a great time to tell you about all the other shows that are on the Chief Sports Network. You all know about the daily shows, 10 to 2 p.m., 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You have JB, who kind of runs point on the 10 to 12 show, has a lot of great guests. I mean, Will Crow was on there today. Whittle's on there a lot. I mean, Chad Holbrook, Jim Toman, just some recent guests absolutely crushed it. And then you have Phil and JC, who are doing the 12 to 2 p.m. show. That show is an absolute riot. I always check it out. I always have it on the background while I'm working. Those two do a great job. Tailgate Talks with Pat DeMarco and Steven Garcia. If you haven't checked out the episode, I think that dropped either yesterday or today, Nick Imunwari is on it, and it's a great episode. And then Joe Machika is covering women's basketball. He was on last night. Alex, did you go live with him last night?
Yeah, I was on there for about 10, 15 minutes or so with him.
Yeah, so, Joe does a great job and, covering the women's program. And then, golly, we have Chin Music with Chad Holbrook, and Chad's the best guy in the world. Actually had Chad come look at my father-in-law's sports card collection, and, that man sat there and sifted through 100,000 cards for about 8 hours. And JB talks about it, but he loves his sports cards. So, we have high school talk with Phil Kornblut. We really do have a very, very great, very, very, very great network and so much Gamecock coverage. But Alex, we are, I guess, a week away, maybe less than a week away from spring practice. Alex and I talked a little bit earlier. Kind of want to get his take on this. We said that we're going to have 3 things we're going to watch in spring practice. Alex, I don't know if you want to go first or if you want me to go first, but I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, you want to go I do one, you do one?
Yeah, let's do it that way.
Okay. All right. I'd say first thing I'm watching spring practice is going to be the wide receiver position. I think there's probably 3 or 4 position battles going on. That's going to be one of them. And obviously, you got the guy, Nick Harbor. I think that's going to be one that everybody's going to have their eye on. Can he take that next step from, the light was really starting to come on for him at wide receiver middle towards the end of the season last year. Really started to see him starting to really come into his own. And, can he build off of that in the spring? And I think him not going through the indoor track season, I think that's going to help him to continue to, elevate his game. And along with him, you got Mazio Bennett, Jared Brown, and Dre Jacobs coming back as returning guys. And I think that's a pretty solid group of returners to have. But then you got the 5 true freshmen coming in. And I think that's a group that's really started to turn some heads early on. And obviously, being freshmen, it's going to be a lot to adjust to playing SEC football. But, it's going to be one to really kind of watch for those guys. So I think they've really caught the attention of the coaching staff so far. And, anything you can get from those guys, because I think they're going to be dependent on just from a numbers standpoint. But, it sounds like those guys are ready to go. And then, once as the spring kind of progresses, they'll kind of evaluate what they need to do potentially in the spring portal window at that position.
Yeah, I think when you think about the wide receivers, and you and I talked about on the show like last year, like I think this is the best wide receiver class that South Carolina has ever had. I go back to that '07 class with, Jason Barnes, Joe Hills, Chris Culliver, Deion LaCorn. I might be missing one or two, but Chris Culliver eventually found his way to defense, and Joe Hills, love him. He was on my intramural team. Jason Barnes was on my intramural team. Great people. Some of the best people you'll ever meet in your entire life. But at the same time, they never really found their way to a starting role at South Carolina. So this freshman class of wide receiver, I think that at least two of them are going to play, and maybe three of them. But yeah, the wide receiver is a big thing that we need to be paying attention to, because last year, and look, I do think Lenore Sellers finds a way to spread it around. Like, I don't think he cares who the wide receiver is, but we had a lot of big plays last year that were catch and runs for the Gamecocks, and maybe not so many tightly contested balls where the guy had to go up and get it, or, Lenore's put on his numbers and he called it. So some more consistency there will be pretty big. Alex, one of the things that I'm looking forward to is the offensive line battle. One of the things that, again, we've talked about for a very long time is how well South Carolina has recruited the offensive line. And, I think Josiah Thompson is probably locked in as a starter, but you brought in a couple of transfers that, want to play. And you got Tree Babalade. You got a lot of guys on that offensive line. Just seeing how that shakes out.
Yeah, that's the interior spots. The three interior spots are going to be one to really watch. And you mentioned it, like, I feel like Tree Babalade may just be too good to keep off the field, and then they're going to have to find a spot for him to play in. I'd be really intrigued to see him at left guard beside Josiah Thompson. I think that could form a really nice, left side of the offensive line. And, then you got some other guys like, Trovon Ball, who I think we all saw what he could do his freshman season. I think, Pro Football Focus had him as a freshman All-American, and he played primarily special teams last year, but is he now ready to go potentially at that right guard spot maybe? And then you got, I think Boaz Stanley maybe has the inside track right now to that center spot, because he played really well there at Troy there before coming to South Carolina. He's an older kind of experienced player. But then you look at those guys, but then there's a lot of depth in that room, really kind of all around at each position. You got the transfers and Nick Sharp and Rodney Newsom, who are experienced guys who sounds like want to come in and try to make an immediate impact. And then you just continue to watch some of those other guys. Marquis Anderson as well, he's another guy to watch. Some of those younger guys who were brought in last year who redshirted, Blake Franks and Cam Pringle, what kind of step do they take? There's Jatavius Shivers is another one to watch at tackle.
Yeah.
He did really well when he came in. Like, now it feels like I can keep going on with the names, and it's just we've seen them starting to build this depth in the offensive line room, really through recruiting and the transfer portal ranks, and you're really starting to see that depth show right now, because it really, at every spot, there's a lot of different quality options they could go with, and you really, any of the five they run out there, it wouldn't be a bad idea. And so I think it's just, I think they're really they've built that room to where they're not going to let 2023 happen again, where the injuries kind of really derailed, not only the offensive line's performance, but really kind of hampered the offensive performance overall. I think they just kind of made it a goal to not let that ever happen again.
Yeah, it's one of those things. You talk about Big Tree, you talk about Trovon, and then you talk about, I don't know how I'm blanking on his name, the left tackle this past year. Why am I blanking right now? Yeah, I think that's like 2 or 3 freshman All-Americans that you have on the offensive line. And look, I know that there was a lot about, like, these guys are freshman All-Americans. Why aren't they playing this year? Talking about Trovon and Big Tree. But, like, I always like to remind people, there's not that many freshmen that actually play in college football, especially on the offensive line. You got to have slim pickings, and you kind of go through there and say, oh, this guy started 8 games, played in the SEC. There's not much that you can really, discern like why they're freshmen All-Americans, but they were.
Yeah, but your point, you're right on your point, but also having the experience that Trovon and Tree got that first year, that's going to be invaluable obviously they got to learn last year under those guys like Torricelli and Kamara and Vershawn Lee and those other guys, but that experience is going to be invaluable for them only this year, especially those two play or starting 5, but moving forward as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so we talked about wide receiver, we talked about offensive line. Alex, what's next on your list?
I'm going to move to what they do with Jalen Kilgore. I think that's really interesting to see what they do. Obviously, he's been at nickel this past season and was awesome at it. I think he had 48 tackles and 5 interceptions and maybe like 10 pass breakups, somewhere along those lines. Now, the question is, do they move him back to safety? Because Nick Worry, obviously, he's gone. He went tested off the charts at the NFL Scouting Combine and could very much be a first-round pick when the draft comes around. But so now the question is, what do they do with him? Do they keep him at nickel or do they move him back to safety? And you can see it's kind of the same, debate we're going to have with the offensive line. There's a lot of different quality options they can go with at either position. Thinking about that safety spot, you got guys like Peyton Williams, who every time he comes in, I mean, it seems like he's making plays. I mean, he took over for DQ Smith in that Vanderbilt game when he was injured and made plays all over the field. You think back to that Tennessee game. What would that have been 3 years ago? No, 2 years ago, the home game, he came in and played really well and made plays all over the field. So you got him, you got David Busey, who's a guy who you saw on kickoff team this year. Like he'll come up and he'll hit you. So that's a safety spot. At nickel spot, you could see a guy like maybe a Jalewis Solomon in there working a little bit. Like if they decide to go with Jalen Kilgore back at safety, but I kind of feel like they're maybe going to try to keep Jalen Kilgore at nickel just because with the way he played this year, I feel like if you're going to take him out of that starting spot at nickel, you almost have to bring somebody in who you feel really good can play at the level that he can at that spot, just how important that nickel position is in Clayton White's defense. And
it's just a worry. It's just a worry that maybe Miles Norwood can't lock down his side of the field. Like if you see him move, that's why. Jalen Kilgore, that is.
Yeah, and Brandon Cisse, watch for him for that spot too. I mean, he could be a really good corner, but he also played a little bit of nickel at NC State too. So that's a really intriguing battle, and it's another one like I mentioned with that offensive line. There's so many different quality options they can go with for either of those spots, and it's a good problem to have with the depth that they built.
Yeah. So my next one, Alex, is Kyle Kennard, National Defensive Player of the Year. I think that he really benefited being across the line from Dylan Stewart. And look, Kyle Kennard had 5 sacks in the game at Georgia Tech. It's not like he was chopped liver before he came to South Carolina. But I wonder who's going to start opposite of Dylan Stewart. And, they have Jaylen Brown, who came over from Missouri. They have some homegrown guys. I think Gilbert Edmonds still has another year. Gilbert does not have another year. No. But they have a number of guys, and they're going to have to find a way because they rotate them so much to keep people fresh. Like defensive line, I think South Carolina might have had one of the best defensive lines in the country last year. Mm-hmm. And, this upcoming season, you don't want to see a drop off. So, Alex, what are you thinking for opposite D Stu?
Yeah,
the new D Stu, D Stu Volume 2.
Yeah, there's a lot of different players they can go with for that spot to go opposite of him. I would watch Jaylen Brown because I think he's got all the potential in the world that you can see. And I think Sterling Lucas can really kind of work with him. And, maybe he doesn't have that Kyle Kennard type of season because Kyle Kennard was an older player coming into the program. But, I mean, you can see it. I mean, Missouri didn't want to lose him, and he had that relationship in high school ranks with South Carolina, and that was a big pickup for him. And you can see why he was still so highly ranked coming from the transfer portal. A few more to keep an eye on would be JT Gear. I think he started a few games early in the season where they're kind of trying to figure out the rotation. And he's one that he had good numbers at Syracuse, and he also comes in there and makes plays. But the one guy
really quick, Alex, on Gear. Yeah. The coaches were very excited about him before he got hurt in the preseason 2 years ago. So maybe he's back to full strength.
Yeah, I think that could very well be the case. And Brian Thomas Jr. is another one. Like when you watch, I could see him very well being a starter, to be honest, coming into day one of either spring practice or day one of the first game against Virginia Tech. Because when you watch him, you can tell he just goes all out. Like he always makes plays. He's going 110%, and I think he's just one that I could very well see him being the number one starter. And I mean, a few more to watch there. I mean, Des Yu. I mean, he's a guy who from year 1 to year 2 physically, I think took the next step, and now it's just taking that onto the field and taking the next step. And then Wendell Gregory was a guy who came into the program as a linebacker, but then he moved to edge. And I think that's a long term. I think that's kind of where he fits really well. I mean, he did it at a very high level at Walton County, which is a high level high school Georgia football. So I mean, he's one that I think now with a year under his belt, kind of a year conditioning to be an edge, he could be one that really, maybe doesn't start right away, but could be easily in that rotation.
Alex, one of the things I think is important about what you just said is you didn't mention any of the true freshmen. And I think a lot of those true freshmen are underrated. And we don't have to go into the weeds there, but just something I thought about. Alex, what is your last thing you're looking for in spring practice?
I was going to do defensive tackle because that can easily be one, but I'm going to switch it and go running back because I think that's one where obviously you have to replace Raheem Sanders or Rocket Sanders, who's one of the top running backs in the country. And you may not be able to fully replace him, but Rasul Faison has everything that it takes to replace him. And then you got the returning guys. I mean, Jordan Howell, you saw his explosiveness and his quickness throughout the season in some of those games, and early in the bowl game. He did have that fumble in the bowl game, but, I mean, you saw that explosive and that potential. And then Matthew Fuller was a guy who, physically looked ready to go as a freshman last year. And then he just had those guys in front of him on the depth chart, so he got to learn from some of those guys and continue to work himself into being ready as an SEC running back. So, I think and then Oscar Attaway, you can't forget about him. And when he took over as being the number one back, he looked pretty solid in that game too. So a lot of different options to go with there. I think you have to expect Oscar Attaway probably gets the first team carries at that first day of spring practice, but wouldn't be surprising to see Rasul Faison. I think you expect Rasul Faison to be the number one back come preseason camp and into the season. But I mean, they have depth in that room, and you need that at that position because of how banged up it can get.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think the running back room is looking as good as it has at South Carolina in a very long time. A lot of talented kids like Matthew Fuller, the coaching staff loved him out of high school and they still love him. And, having 3 or 4 backs and, preferably 4, you feel like you can get through the SEC rigors. And I think that all these guys are capable of being starters, even though only one's going to run out, to start the game this upcoming fall. Alex, so I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball at you. I'm going to kind of give you 2. I'm going to talk quickly about one, and then I want to move to the other one here. But linebacker, obviously, Gamecocks have to replace a lot at linebacker. I got some transfers. Fred looks pretty daggum good, and we'll see what the Gamecocks do there. And we'll talk about linebacker more as we get more information and more intel from the program. But I saw something in the chat earlier, and I kind of agree with it. So that's why I'm calling an audible. Who's going to be the backup quarterback? Is Aaron Nolan going to win that job? What does he look like? How good is he? It's a lefty. It's a different type of ball that's coming out. And you and I both saw Cutter Woods over the summer, and he was very, very impressive. I think it's going to be Aaron Nolan, just because he already has a year in a college system. But, don't forget about Dante Reno as well. He's a guy that throws a beautiful ball, has zip, has everything, just needed the game to slow down for him. So maybe I'm looking at that quarterback room, and only because I do think Lenore Sellers has the potential to be a first-round pick next year. Mm-hmm. So, what are you thinking about that quarterback room?
Yeah, I would go Aaron Nolan number 2 going into spring practice, and I wouldn't be surprised if it stayed that way. But I mean, that's not discounting Dante Reno or Cutter Woods, because you mentioned we both seen what both of those guys can do. But Aaron Nolan, I'm really interested to see, just because he's put on weight since Ohio State, and I think he mentioned it, kind of talking to him at the transfer availability a few weeks ago. He's not scared of the competition. He knows that he's coming from working with Chip Kelly and working behind Will Howard at Ohio State. He's not scared of the competition, and I think he thinks that both he and Lenore Sellers can help each other out and help each other continue to improve. And so I would go with him. And I think maybe it's intriguing to see if they have a few packages for him early in the season, or maybe throughout the season, kind of like they did with Robbie Ashford, to come in and take over, or not take over, but kind of just throw defenses off a little bit. So I would go Aaron Nolan number 2 going into the spring, and he's going to be a fun one to watch just because of his athleticism. And he told us at the transfer availability, talking about what his best attributes are, and he kind of mentioned his sneaky athleticism. So I think that's pretty intriguing.
I think so too, and I think that Cutter and Dante are probably going to be battling for that number 3 job. Dante obviously redshirted last year. I know the coaching staff would love to redshirt Cutter Woods if they can, to keep that eligibility there. But quarterback is such a revolving door nowadays, because you could be the number 3 quarterback at an SEC program, and it's going to be funny what I say. I don't mean it this way, but you can go to the ACC and be a starting quarterback at some schools. So, I mean, you're looking at Tanner Bailey, who, sat out a year, and now he's going to play quarterback at Auburn and has a chance to win that job this upcoming year. So South Carolina's quarterback room continues to be good. We'll talk about Mike Shula. We'll talk about, what we think the Gamecocks are going to look like from a schematic point once we figure out what they're trying to do in spring practice and then fall practice and summer. And oh my gosh, football season is really here. Alex, before we get out of here, I want to talk a little about visits. What kind of visits are on the docket, and who can we see before we talk next week, or even like previewing some folks the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, so with spring practice starting next Wednesday, you'll start to see some, recruits starting to roll in from a few different classes. I think the one interesting, obviously official visits are starting to be scheduled as well. But last night it was reported that, Landon Duckworth, former commitment, is going to be in. He's got the official visit scheduled. And I think that's really interesting to watch because, that's a spot that they need to add one, you would think, in this class. And, Jared Curtis was one that they were after, but now he's kind of slimmed his list, or he's cut his list down to Georgia and Oregon. And now you got Landon Duckworth and Brady Smeagol, who's going to be in as well for an unofficial visit here for spring practice. And I think it's later, towards the end of the month. So, that's a spot that's going to be interesting to watch, see what Mike Shula and those guys can do. But, it shows a lot the interest that's there with Landon Duckworth, that being that he was once committed to the program but wants to come back and decommit, or wants to come back and visit after he decommitted. I think that shows there's legit interest on both sides still.
Yeah, so we're going to stay on top of all this recruiting stuff. I mean, quarterbacks always a big position of need. Defensive line's a big position of need. Offensive line as well. We talked about the offensive line. It looks pretty good right now, but we'll see. I mean, Carolina is in the game with so many high level recruits, Alex. I mean, at this point, it's way too early to project like top 5 class, top 10 class, top 15 class, top 25 class, top 50 class, whatever. But summer is when we figure those kind of things out. And we're seeing more and more high school recruits commit in the summer and stick with their commitment. So, we're going to be all over it. I cannot believe that, Alex, I feel like I say it every single week, but like, it's March 12th, dude. Like, it's going to be April before we know it. It's going to be May and June, and then it's going to be August and, September, and then all the Gamecocks are going to be in Atlanta. It's absolutely crazy. The older I get, the faster time moves. And especially since I had a son, like I can't remember, like my wife tapped me on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, my water broke." And it feels like that was yesterday. So doing this, Alex, I know that like, you've probably forgotten more recruits for South Carolina than you can actually name for this upcoming class.
Probably.
But yeah, so we're going to be all over it. We always appreciate Alex. Alex is the absolute best. Love him like a brother, and he's going to continue to bring this recruiting information and football information as we have more shows. And next week, again, I'll just say it, Wednesday night, I told Alex, if he wants to take the week off, he's writing so many articles, he can. But Alex is going to be here for the March Madness episode. Like I said, my good buddy Mitchell is going to be on the show. We're going to go through the entire bracket. So it will be a longer episode. I think last year we went like an hour and 50 minutes. So go ahead and prepare. Maybe you want to, wake up and watch it in the shower or something like that. But we'll have a good time. We're going to give you our picks. I'm sure me, Alex, and Mitch will disagree on some things, but our goal is to try and help you guys win your bracket challenge. So next week is going to be a little football, but a little basketball, a little baseball, but mostly we're going to be talking about March Madness. So can't wait to see y'all next week. And as I close out every show, I always remind all of you that when you spend this time with us, you give us the most valuable thing you have, which is your time. It's never underappreciated. It's always something that we value, you spending this time with us. And we thank you all for allowing us to provide content and be here every Tuesday or Wednesday on this journey through life with everyone. So we appreciate you all so much. And Alex, any parting shots before we get out of here?
Yeah, I mean, just continue to stick. Appreciate everybody here, and continue to stick to the Big Spur because it's, as you mentioned, it's getting to a crazy time right now. You got baseball in full swing. You got, basketball is going to, continue to, with the transfer portal season getting here, ready to go in a few weeks. But it's crazy time, spring football. But it should be a whole lot of fun to come back here next week and see what else has happened in the past week.
Yeah, it never stops, does it?
No, never stops.
Well, we kept you guys a little bit longer than we normally do, guys and gals. But thank you all for being here tonight, and we'll talk to you next week. Looking forward to it. Brackets, print them out and get them ready to fill out when we're on the show. All right, Alex, I'll talk to you probably in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, probably.
All right, bye, everybody. Have a good one.